My retirement account balance stared back at me like a slap in the face. $335,000. Should have been $380,000. Should have been growing steadily toward my planned retirement in 14 years. Instead, there was this ugly $45,000 hole where my sister's promises used to be. Oliver, I know this is frustrating, my financial advisor said, tapping his pen against the mahogany desk between us. But at 52, you're looking at less than 15 years until your target retirement date. Every month that money isn't earning compound interest is costing you significantly. My name is Oliver Gonzalez, and I used to think being the responsible one in my family was a virtue. Turns out it just makes you the designated bank for everyone else's emergencies. I adjusted my wire-rimmed glasses and stared at the numbers again. $45,000. Gone. Supposedly temporary, definitely permanent at this point. The same amount I'd saved by eating packed lunches and skipping vacations for 8 years straight. How much is this costing me exactly, I asked, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Conservatively, if that money had stayed invested and continued earning 7% annually, you're looking at roughly $120,000 less at retirement. He paused, probably watching my face turn interesting colors. That's assuming the principal is never repaid. Never repaid. The words hit like ice water, because that's exactly what this was turning into, wasn't it? 5 years ago, this nightmare started with a phone call that came at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. I was in my Denver apartment reviewing quarterly reports and getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed with my sister's number. Stephanie never called after 9 p.m. unless someone was dead or dying. Oliver? Her voice was thick with tears. I need help. We're going to lose the house. My 55-year-old sister, who'd always been the dramatic one, was sobbing into the phone about foreclosure proceedings. Her husband Jesse, 53 and perpetually optimistic about his latest business venture, had lost his job 3 months earlier. They were behind on mortgage payments for their suburban Phoenix home, where they'd lived for 8 years. The bank had started foreclosure proceedings. Mom and Dad can't help, she'd said between hiccups. Dad's medical bills from his diabetes complications are killing them financially, and Mom's already stretched thin taking care of him. Of course they couldn't help. Dad's 76 now, and his health had been declining for years. Mom, at 74, was managing his care while trying to maintain their own household. They were barely keeping their heads above water. And there I was, 3 states away in Colorado, the responsible one who'd built a stable life precisely to avoid this kind of family drama. I'd moved away at 22 specifically, because I knew this day would come. When you were raised watching your sister default on car loans and your parents bail her out, you learn to keep your distance. But family emergencies have a way of reaching across state lines and grabbing you by the throat. Oliver, please, she'd begged. I swear on my life I'll pay you back within 2 years. Definitely before you retire. Jesse's got this consulting business he's starting, and once that takes off, we'll be fine. Better than fine. The consulting business? Jesse had been talking about various business ventures for as long as I'd known him, always convinced the next one would be his big break. But their 10-year-old son would have to change schools if they lost the house. My nephew, who'd already been through enough disruption in his young life. That's what got me. Not Stephanie's tears or her promises, but the thought of my nephew having to start over somewhere new, because his parents couldn't manage money. Still, I wasn't stupid. If I do this, we're putting it in writing, a formal loan agreement. Of course, whatever you want. Just please, Oliver, I'm begging you. So I drove down to Phoenix that weekend with a loan agreement I'd drafted myself. $45,000. Exactly enough to bring their mortgage current and cover the legal fees to stop foreclosure. The document was simple but legal. Stephanie Gonzalez promises to repay the full amount within 2 years, definitely before Oliver's planned retirement. She signed it without reading it. I transferred the money directly to their mortgage company because I wasn't about to hand cash to someone with a history of financial disasters. The foreclosure stopped, the house was saved, my nephew got to stay in his school, and I became $45,000 poorer. For the first year, Stephanie called every few months with updates. The consulting business was picking up clients. Jesse was optimistic about landing a big contract. They were grateful and working hard to get back on their feet. Year 2, the calls became less frequent. The consulting business was taking longer to establish than expected. The economy was tough. They were doing their best but needed a little more time. Year 3 came and went, then year 4. The excuses evolved from specific business challenges to vague references about getting their finances straightened out and working on a payment plan. Now, 5 years later, I was sitting in my financial advisor's office, staring at the evidence of my stupidity while he calculated how much my family loyalty was going to cost me in retirement. The worst part? I tried calling Stephanie 6 times over the past 3 months. 6 times, and she hadn't answered once. No return calls, no texts, nothing. Her excuses about needing more time had become increasingly vague over the past year, and now she wasn't even bothering to make excuses at all. The responsible one. What a joke. Turned out being responsible just meant you were the one left holding the bag when everyone else decided to disappear. 2 weeks later, I was driving through suburban Phoenix on what was supposed to be a routine business trip, when I decided to make a detour that would change everything. My company had sent me to audit a client's quarterly reports, standard stuff that usually took 2 days max. But Phoenix was only a 6-hour drive from Denver, and I'd been stewing about those unanswered calls for months. Maybe it was time to have a face-to-face conversation with my sister about that pesky $45,000 she seemed to have forgotten about. I pulled into the familiar neighborhood where Stephanie had lived for 13 years. Same beige stucco houses, same palm trees lining the streets, same general sense that this was where middle-class families came to live the suburban dream. Except when I turned onto her street, something was wrong. There was a bright red "sold" sign planted in what used to be my sister's front yard. I sat in my rental car for a full minute, staring at that sign like it might disappear if I blinked hard enough. But no, it was definitely there. And there were definitely people carrying furniture into the house. New people. People who weren't my sister. A young guy, maybe early 30s, was wrestling a couch through the front door with help from what looked like his father. I got out of the car and walked over, my brain still trying to process what I was seeing. "Excuse me," I called out. "I'm looking for the woman who used to live here. Stephanie Gonzalez?" The young father set down his end of the couch and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Oh yeah, we bought the house from her and her husband about 3 months ago. Nice lady. Seemed really eager to close quickly, which worked out great for us. 3 months ago. While I'd been calling and getting silence, she'd been selling the house. Did she mention where they were moving?" I asked, probably sounding calmer than I felt. "Somewhere near Tucson, I think. Her husband mentioned something about cheaper housing costs and helping out family down there." He smiled helpfully. "Your family?" "Her brother." "Oh, cool. She seemed really close to her family. Always talking about how much everyone meant to each other." Right, so close that she'd apparently moved without telling anyone, including the brother who'd saved her house from foreclosure. I thanked the guy and walked back to my car, pulling out my phone before I'd even closed the door. My hands were shaking as I dialed my parents' number, and I couldn't tell if it was from anger or shock or some toxic combination of both. "Mom? It's Oliver." "Oh, hi, sweetheart. How are you? I wasn't expecting—" "Did you know Stephanie sold her house?" The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Well, yes, she mentioned they were making some changes," Mom said carefully. "She said she was working out payment arrangements with you and handling the debt situation." Payment arrangements. That was rich. "She sold the house 3 months ago, Mom. 3 months. And she's been dodging my calls the entire time." "Oliver, I'm sure there's an explanation. Stephanie said they needed to move to help care for an elderly aunt near Tucson. Housing is much cheaper there, and family has to help family." An elderly aunt. Of course there was an elderly aunt. "What's her new address and phone number?" Another pause. "Well, I don't think I should just give out her personal information without asking her first. Mom, I loaned her $45,000 5 years ago. She promised to pay me back. She sold the house I helped save and disappeared. I think I'm entitled to know where she lives." "Oliver, you're being very aggressive about this money situation. Family should work these things out privately, not through demands and ultimatums." Aggressive? I'd been aggressive by expecting repayment of a documented loan. Dad got on the line then, probably sensing the conversation was heading somewhere dangerous. "Son, maybe Stephanie is still getting settled down there. Moving is stressful, especially with a teenager. Perhaps she'll reach out once she's established." But he didn't sound convinced. Dad had always been uncomfortable with family drama, and his voice had that quality it got when he was trying to convince himself of something. "Dad, she blocked my phone number and my email. I discovered that when I tried to call her on the way over here." "She blocked you?" Mom sounded genuinely surprised, which was almost worse than if she'd been lying. "Completely. No calls, no texts, no emails. That doesn't sound like someone who's planning to pay me back, does it?" The silence stretched long enough that I started to wonder if they'd hung up. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "We didn't know about the blocked communication, Oliver. That's concerning." "You think? What exactly did she tell you about this move?" "She said the housing market was good, and they could get a better deal in Arizona," Mom said, her voice getting defensive again. She said she was working out a payment plan with you for the money situation. What payment plan? She hasn't spoken to me in months. Well, maybe she's been trying to figure out the best way to approach it. Money conversations are difficult, Oliver, especially between family. I closed my eyes and counted to 5, then 10. Mom, how much did she sell the house for? I don't think that's really any of our business. It's my business when she used my money to save that house from foreclosure. How much? Dad answered this time, his voice quiet. She said they got a good price. Over what they owed on the mortgage. How much over? Oliver, I don't see why. How much, Dad? Around $160,000 more than what they still owed. $160,000. My sister had walked away with over $160,000 in profit from the house I'd helped save. And instead of paying me back even a portion of what she owed, she'd used that money to buy a new house and disappeared. Where did that money go? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. They put it toward a down payment on the new house, Mom said reluctantly. And Jesse started some kind of consulting business with part of it. Stephanie said they needed to invest in their future. Their future. While my $45,000 sat in their bank account, getting invested in their future, my retirement fund had a hole in it that was going to cost me over $100,000 by the time I was 66. So let me get this straight, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Stephanie sold the house for a massive profit, used that money to buy a new house and start a business, blocked all communication with me, and told you she was working out payment arrangements. Does that sound right to you? Oliver, you're making this sound much worse than it is, Mom said. She's going through a difficult time adjusting to a new place. Maybe she's embarrassed about the money situation and doesn't know how to bring it up. Then why didn't she call me before she sold the house? Why didn't she offer to pay me back when she had over $160,000 in her hands? I don't know, Oliver, but I'm sure she has her reasons. Her reasons. My sister had defrauded me out of $45,000, and my mother was sure she had her reasons. Give me her address and phone number, Mom. I really think you should let us reach out to her first. Let her know you want to talk. Family conflicts should be handled delicately. No. Give me your information now or I'll find it myself. Oliver, please. You're going to tear this family apart over money. I was going to tear the family apart. Not Stephanie, who'd lied to everyone and stolen my retirement savings. Me, for having the audacity to want my money back. The family was already torn apart the day she decided to cheat me, I said. I just didn't know it yet. And that's when I realized the truth that had been staring me in the face for months. This wasn't an oversight or a communication breakdown or a temporary financial squeeze. My sister had deliberately cut off all contact with me while pocketing over $160,000 in profits from the house I'd helped her save. She'd planned this from the beginning, blocked me from reaching her, fed my parents a story about elderly aunts and payment arrangements, and walked away with a substantial windfall that could have easily covered my loan 10 times over. She'd played me perfectly, and now she was gone. I sat in that rental car outside my sister's sold house for exactly 3 minutes, watching strangers carry furniture through the door that my money had helped save. Then I turned the engine back on and drove straight to my parents' house. 15 minutes later, I was standing on their familiar front porch, finger jabbing the doorbell like it owed me money, which technically everyone in this family did at this point. Mom opened the door wearing that same floral blouse she'd had for 5 years and the expression she got whenever family drama was about to explode in her face. She could probably smell it on me. Oliver, what a surprise. We weren't expecting... Did you know Stephanie sold her house 3 months ago? The way her face shifted told me everything. That careful, practiced look of someone who'd been caught but was going to try to talk her way out of it anyway. Well, hello to you too, sweetheart. Come in, come in. Your father's in his chair watching the news. I followed her into the living room where Dad was indeed in his recliner, remote in hand, but his attention was already focused on us instead of whatever was playing on the TV. The man had radar for family conflict. Hi, Dad. Son. He muted the television and adjusted his glasses. You look upset. I'm past upset. I just found out my sister sold the house I saved from foreclosure, pocketed over $160,000 in profit, and has been dodging my calls for months. So, yeah, I'm a little beyond upset. Mom settled into her usual spot on the couch and immediately went into damage control mode. Oliver, Stephanie is going through a very difficult time adjusting to Arizona. You need to be more understanding about her situation. Understanding. Right. Because apparently I was the one who needed an attitude adjustment here. More understanding? Mom, she deliberately cheated me out of money she clearly had. She sold that house for a massive profit, and instead of paying me back even a fraction of what she owed, She bought a new house and started a business. With my money. Now, hold on, Dad said, sitting forward in his chair. Maybe she's planning to pay you back once she gets settled down there. Moving is expensive, and starting over in a new place takes time. I could see him trying to work through the logic, but his voice had that quality it got when he was trying to convince himself of something that didn't quite add up. Dad, she blocked my phone number. And my email. That's not the behavior of someone who's planning to pay me back. Mom's hands started doing that twisting thing they did when she was nervous. Well, maybe she's just overwhelmed and doesn't know how to approach the money conversation. These things are delicate, Oliver. Delicate? I laughed, and it came out sharper than I intended. She blocked me from contacting her while she was selling the house. There's nothing delicate about fraud. You're being very aggressive about this whole situation, Mom said, her voice getting that defensive edge. And I don't appreciate you throwing around words like fraud when you're talking about your sister. Then what would you call it? She borrowed $45,000, promised to pay it back, then disappeared with $100,000. $60,000 windfall. What exactly am I supposed to call that? Dad cleared his throat. Son, maybe we should all take a step back here. No, actually, I think it's time we stepped forward, into reality. I turned back to Mom. What exactly did Stephanie tell you about this move? She said they needed to relocate to help care for an elderly relative near Tucson, Mom said carefully, and that housing costs were much lower there so they could get more for their money. And what did she tell you about paying me back? The pause that followed was long enough to confirm what I already knew. She said she was working out a payment arrangement with you, Mom finally said, that she needed time to figure out the best way to handle the financial situation. When did she tell you this? Well, when she called to let us know about the move, of course. Which was when exactly? Mom glanced at Dad, who was studying his hands like they contained the secrets of the universe. About 4 months ago, she said reluctantly. 4 months ago, while she was already planning to sell the house and disappear. And during these conversations about payment arrangements, did she happen to mention that she'd blocked all communication with me? Another glance between my parents. Dad's jaw was getting that tight look it got when he was realizing he'd been played. She didn't mention anything about blocked communication, he said quietly. That's because there were no payment arrangements. There were no conversations about money. There was just her deciding to steal my retirement savings and disappear. I could feel my voice getting louder, but I didn't care anymore. And you know what the really beautiful part is? She asked you not to give me her contact information, didn't she? Mom's face went 3 shades paler. She said she needed space to figure things out financially, she admitted, the words coming out like they were being pulled from her with pliers. And there it was. The smoking gun. She manipulated you into becoming accomplices, I said, the realization hitting me like a slap. She fed you a story about payment arrangements that didn't exist, then asked you to help her avoid me while she was pocketing my money. Now, wait just a minute, Mom said, her voice getting shrill. You're making this sound much worse than it is. Stephanie has been helping the family, Oliver. She moved to Arizona to take care of relatives who needed support. She's making sacrifices while you're sitting in Colorado worrying about money. Helping the family? I stared at her. Mom, she stole $45,000 from me and bought a house with the profits. What part of that sounds like helping the family? She's taking care of people who need her, Mom shot back. She's not just thinking about herself like some people. Like some people. Meaning me. The guy who'd been sending them money for Dad's medical bills for 7 years without telling anyone. What relatives is she taking care of exactly? I asked. An elderly aunt who needs daily assistance, Mom said without hesitation. Someone has to step up when family members need help. What's this aunt's name? Well, I don't think that's really relevant. I looked at Dad, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable with this whole conversation. Dad, do you know anything about this elderly aunt? He adjusted his glasses again, which he only did when he was nervous. Well, to be honest, son, we've never actually heard of any aunt in Arizona. Mom's head snapped toward him. What are you talking about? Addison, we don't have any relatives in Arizona. I thought Stephanie was talking about helping some family friend, not an actual relative. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my mother's face cycle through confusion, realization, and then panic as the pieces started falling into place. So, let me get this straight, I said, keeping my voice deadly calm. Stephanie told you she was struggling financially while secretly sitting on over $160,000 in house sale profits. She told you she was working out payment arrangements with me while actively blocking all communication. And she told you she was caring for an elderly aunt who doesn't exist. Dad was staring at Mom now, and I could see the wheels turning behind his glasses. Addison, did you actually believe there was an aunt? She said she was helping family members. You assumed because you wanted to believe her, I said. Just like you always do. Oliver, that's not fair. Fair? I felt something snap inside me. You want to talk about fair? I've been trying to reach my sister for months to discuss a $45,000 debt. Instead of giving me her contact information so we could work something out like adults, you helped her hide from me. You became part of her scheme. We did not become part of any scheme, Mom said, but her voice was shaking now. We were protecting our daughter during a difficult time. No, you were protecting her from the consequences of stealing my money. We didn't know about the communication issues, Dad said quietly. If we'd known she was blocking your calls, you'd have what? Done something, or would you have found another excuse for her? I could see Dad wrestling with that question, and for the first time in years he looked genuinely angry instead of just disappointed. Give me her address and phone number, I said. Oliver, I really don't think that's appropriate, Mom said. Family matters should be handled through proper channels. Proper channels? Like the ones where my sister commits fraud and you help her cover it up? You're being ridiculous. Nobody committed fraud. Then why won't you give me her contact information? Because family conflicts should be resolved through intermediaries. We should be the ones to reach out to her and arrange a conversation. Dad was quiet for a long moment, then said, Addison, maybe Oliver has a point. If Stephanie owes him money and has been avoiding his calls, she doesn't owe him money, Mom snapped. That was a family gift to help during a crisis. It was a documented loan with a signed agreement, I said. And the bank records show exactly when I transferred the money and why. Well, maybe the documentation is unclear. And that's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. This wasn't just about my parents being manipulated. This was about them choosing to protect Stephanie even after knowing the truth. Dad seemed to be reading my mind. Son, I want you to know that if I'd understood the full situation. But you do understand it now, I said. I just explained exactly what happened. She stole my money, lied to you about payment arrangements, invented a fake aunt, and asked you to help her avoid me. And you're still refusing to give me her contact information. Mom lifted her chin in that stubborn way she got when she'd decided to dig in. I'm not going to facilitate a confrontation that could tear this family apart. The family was already torn apart the day she decided to steal from me. You just decided not to notice. I looked at Dad, who was staring at his hands again. His silence was somehow worse than Mom's excuses. So that's it then, I said. She manipulates you into helping her cover up fraud, and you're okay with that? Because keeping the peace is more important than doing what's right. Oliver, please, Mom said. You're taking this whole money thing too seriously. Stephanie is family. Family helps family. Yeah, well, apparently family also steals from family and gets away with it because other family members would rather enable the theft than admit they've been played. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the whole conversation. She lied to all of us, Mom. She's been lying from the beginning. And instead of being angry about that, you're angry at me for calling it what it is. Dad finally looked up. Son, maybe if we just give this some time? Time for what? For her to spend more of my money? For you to come up with better excuses for her? I could see the discomfort in his eyes now, the growing realization that he'd been defending something indefensible, but he wasn't going to admit it. Not yet. I think you should leave, Mom said, her voice shaking. You're upset and saying things you don't mean. No, I'm saying things I should have said years ago. I headed toward the door, then turned back. She played all of us. The difference is, I'm done pretending that's okay. As I walked back to my car, I could hear them arguing inside the house. Dad's voice was getting louder. Mom's was getting higher, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they were fighting about. Because I finally understood the game that had been playing out in my family for decades. Stephanie created the crisis, manipulated everyone into helping her, then disappeared when it was time to face consequences. And my parents, who should have been furious about being lied to and used, had chosen to protect her instead of holding her accountable. They weren't just enablers, they were accomplices. And I was done being the responsible one who pretended that was acceptable. I sat in my rental car outside my parents' house for exactly 10 minutes, watching the neighbors across the street water their perfect desert landscaping, while my family imploded behind those familiar beige walls. Then I pulled out my phone and started doing what I should have done months ago, finding my sister. First, I tried the obvious route. Mutual friends from high school, college acquaintances who might still be in touch. Even that weird cousin from El Paso who somehow stayed connected to everyone through Facebook. Every single conversation went the same way. Hey, do you happen to have Stephanie's current phone number? I've been trying to reach her, but oh, I think she changed her number recently. Have you tried messaging her on Facebook? Right, Facebook, where I discovered that not only had she blocked my phone number and email, but she'd also blocked me on every social media platform known to humanity. Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. Because apparently professional networking was also off limits when you're trying to avoid paying back $45,000. But here's the thing about being methodical. It's not just useful for retirement planning. It's also pretty handy for tracking down people who think they can disappear. I spent the next 3 weeks becoming an expert in public records searches. Property transfers, voter registrations, business licenses, court records. Amazing what you can find when someone thinks they've covered their tracks but forgot that buying a house leaves a paper trail the size of the Grand Canyon. Stephanie Gonzalez had purchased a house in Tucson, Arizona for $200,000. $200,000, with a down payment that looked suspiciously close to the profits from selling the Phoenix house. The same house she'd bought with my money. I printed everything, property records, mortgage documents, even the listing photos that showed her posing in front of a swimming pool that cost more than most people's cars. Then I called the one person who could help me turn this mountain of evidence into actual consequences. Marcus Webb had the kind of law office that screamed, "I win cases like this for breakfast." Downtown Denver, 15th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His paralegal offered me coffee in a real mug, not a paper cup, which somehow made me feel like this was about to get very serious. Family financial disputes, Marcus said, flipping through the documents I'd brought. Specifically, loan defaults with documented fraud indicators. This is actually my specialty. Was younger than I'd expected. Maybe early 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of focused intensity that made me understand why his hourly rate was 3 times what I'd initially budgeted for legal help. Walk me through the timeline, he said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. Start with the original crisis. I told him everything. The foreclosure threat, the emergency loan, the signed agreement, the bank transfers directly to the mortgage company. The years of excuses and delays, the blocked communications, the house sale, and the disappearing act. Marcus took notes without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small marks in the margins. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me with the expression of someone who'd just been handed an early Christmas present. Mr. Gonzalez, this isn't just a loan default. This is fraud. Documented, deliberate, and frankly, pretty stupid fraud. Meaning? Meaning your sister made 3 critical mistakes. First, she put the loan in writing, which eliminates any possibility of claiming this was a family gift. Second, she sold the property for substantial profit while actively avoiding repayment, which demonstrates bad faith. And third, she blocked all communication with you while using those profits to purchase assets in another state. He flipped to a clean page and started sketching out numbers. We can pursue the original loan amount, obviously, plus 5 years of interest at the legal rate, which brings us to about $58,000. Then there are legal fees, court costs, and here's where it gets interesting. Punitive damages for fraudulent behavior. How much are we talking about? Conservatively, we're looking at total damages around $120,000 to $140,000. Maybe more, depending on how much money we can prove she obtained through this scheme. $140,000. Almost exactly what that missing money was going to cost me at retirement. The beauty of your case, Marcus continued, is that she's already demonstrated the ability to pay. She just bought a $200,000 house. So when she inevitably claims financial hardship, we point to the swimming pool and ask the judge why she prioritized luxury purchases over honoring her debts. I like this guy already. What's the process? We file in Arizona, since that's where she resides and where her assets are located. Arizona courts don't mess around with fraudulent transfers, especially when there's clear documentation like this. We'll get a judgment. And if she doesn't pay voluntarily, we can pursue asset seizure. Asset seizure. The house that she'd bought with my retirement money could be taken to satisfy the debt she'd created by stealing my retirement money. There was a certain poetic justice to that. How long? 6 to 12 months, assuming she doesn't settle quickly, which she won't, based on this pattern of avoidance. People who commit this kind of fraud usually fight until the very end, convinced they can talk their way out of consequences. Marcus spent the next hour walking me through the evidence we'd need to compile. Bank records showing the original transfer, the loan agreement with her signature, documentation of the house sale and the proceeds, proof of her new property purchase, records of blocked communications. I have to ask, he said as we wrapped up. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? Family lawsuits tend to bring out the worst in everyone involved. I thought about my parents. still protecting Stephanie even after learning she'd lied to them about elderly aunts and payment arrangements, still choosing her side even when presented with evidence of deliberate fraud. My family has been ugly for years, I said. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. 3 weeks later, Marcus called with an update that made my entire month. We found her, he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. 1247. Desert Willow Drive, Tucson. And get this, the house is worth more than we thought. Recent comparable sales put it around $250. Your sister's been living pretty well on your dime. The lawsuit papers were filed on a Tuesday. According to Arizona law, defendants have 30 days to respond to civil complaints. According to my family's dysfunction, it took exactly 6 hours for the panic calls to start. My phone rang at 8:15 p.m., Mom's number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out over common sense. Oliver? Her voice was shaking. Stephanie just called us. She's hysterical. She says you're trying to take her house? I'm trying to get my money back. There's a difference. Oliver, please, you can't do this to the family. She has a child to think about. They've been through so much stress with the move and getting settled, and now this... Right. Because my nephew was apparently more important than my retirement, and Stephanie's stress mattered more than her theft. Mom, she stole $45,000 from me. She sold a house for massive profits and disappeared. She blocked my phone number and lied to you about payment arrangements. What exactly did you think was going to happen? We thought you'd work it out like family, through conversation and compromise. I tried conversation. She blocked me. I tried compromise for 5 years. She bought a swimming pool. Silence. Then the sound of Dad taking the phone. Son, maybe there's a way to resolve this without courts and lawyers. Family business should stay in the family. It stopped being family business when she decided to commit fraud, Dad. Now it's criminal business. Oliver, you're going to tear this family apart. The family was already torn apart. I'm just the only one who stopped pretending otherwise. I could hear them conferring in the background, urgent whispers about damage control and family unity. Finally, Mom came back on the line. What if we all sit down together and work out a payment plan? Stephanie says she wants to make this right, but the lawsuit is making everything worse. Stephanie had 5 years to make this right. She chose to steal my money and disappear instead. But surely you don't need all that money right now. You have a good job, you're doing well. Stephanie is struggling with a new business and a new house and teenage son. Can't you be the bigger person here? The bigger person? Because apparently being defrauded made me the villain in the story. No, Mom, I can't, and I won't. Oliver, please, stop calling me about this, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. Stephanie made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. And so do you. I hung up and turned off my phone for the rest of the evening. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up angry. Marcus called the next morning with news that was both expected and oddly satisfying. Your sister hired a lawyer, he said. Karen Hutchins from Tucson, family law specialist known for trying to negotiate payment plans instead of fighting the underlying merits. Meaning? Meaning she's not going to claim the loan was a gift or that you don't have a case. She's going to argue financial hardship and ask the court for mercy. Monthly payments instead of a lump sum. Maybe a reduction in damages based on her client's circumstances. I thought about those listing photos, the swimming pool, the $200,000 house that she'd bought with my retirement money. What are the chances a judge buys that argument? Marcus laughed. When the defendant just bought a house worth $250,000? When she demonstrably had the ability to repay but chose to purchase luxury items instead? When she actively avoided her obligations through blocking communications and interstate relocation? He paused for effect. About the same as me winning the lottery while being struck by lightning during a solar eclipse. Over the following months, I learned more about my sister than I ever wanted to know. And honestly, I kind of wished I could go back to the blissful ignorance of thinking she was just irresponsible with money instead of a calculating fraud. Marcus's legal discovery process was like watching someone slowly peel back layers of an onion, except instead of making me cry, each layer made me progressively more pissed off. Subpoenas, depositions, document requests. Turns out there's a whole machinery designed to force people to tell the truth when they've built their lives on lies. The first bombshell came 6 weeks into the process, buried in a stack of real estate documents that Marcus's paralegal had subpoenaed from Stephanie's Phoenix realtor. Your sister's been planning this for a while, Marcus said, spreading the papers across his conference table like he was dealing cards in the world's most expensive poker game. Look at these. Timestamps. I leaned over the documents, adjusting my glasses to read the fine print. Property searches for Tucson homes, dating back 14 months. School district research for her son, printed 18 months ago. Market analysis reports for Phoenix real estate values, requested 22 months before the sale. 22 months. She'd been researching her exit strategy for nearly 2 years while telling me she was barely keeping the lights on. So the whole financial crisis thing? Oh, the foreclosure threat was real, Marcus said, flipping to another set of documents. But look at this timeline. She received your $45,000 in January 2019. By March of that same year, her husband was already researching business licensing requirements in Arizona. The evidence was right there in black and white. While I'd been sleeping peacefully, thinking my money had saved my sister's home and stabilized her family, she'd been using that stability to plan her profitable disappearing act. Gets better, Marcus continued, pulling out another folder. Financial records from her husband's failed consulting venture. Guess when he started seriously exploring that Arizona opportunity? I already knew the answer was going to make me want to punch something. 6 months after you saved their house from foreclosure, Marcus said, they used your emergency loan to buy themselves time to research, plan, and execute what amounts to a sophisticated theft scheme. A sophisticated theft scheme. Not a family misunderstanding, not a communication breakdown, not someone overwhelmed by circumstances making poor decisions in the moment. A fucking theft scheme that had been in the works for over a year. By month 3 of the legal process, Marcus had subpoenaed enough financial records to reconstruct my sister's entire deception like a crime scene investigation. Bank statements, credit card records, mortgage documents, property tax assessments. Everything she'd done with my money laid out in chronological order. The beauty of financial fraud, Marcus explained during one of our monthly updates, is that money leaves a paper trail whether you want it to or not. Your sister thought moving to Arizona would make her untouchable, but every transaction is documented somewhere. The documents told a story that was somehow both more calculated and more stupid than I'd imagined. Yes, Stephanie had been struggling financially in early 2019, but instead of using my loan as breathing room to fix her underlying problems, she'd used it as seed money for a long-term profit scheme. The mortgage payments I'd made directly to her lender had bought her 18 months of stability. During those 18 months, instead of working to repay me, she'd researched Arizona real estate markets, investigated business opportunities for her husband, and even taken a scouting trip to Tucson that she'd never mentioned to anyone in the family. Here's my favorite part, Marcus said, pointing to a highlighted section of credit card statements. 3 months before she sold the Phoenix house, she charged a 2-week vacation to Hawaii, while supposedly being too financially stressed to return your calls. Hawaii. My sister had been sipping Mai Tais on Waikiki Beach while I'd been checking my phone every day, wondering why she couldn't find 30 seconds to text me back about my $45,000. The fabricated aunt story unraveled in month 4, and that revelation hit differently than the financial evidence. Money schemes are one thing. Desperate people do desperate things when they're drowning. But inventing a dying relative? That takes a special kind of sociopathy. Marcus had hired a private investigator to verify family connections in Arizona, because apparently that's what you do when your legal opponent claims they're caring for elderly relatives who may or may not exist. No aunt, the investigator reported during a conference call that I attended from my Denver office. No elderly relatives at all in the Tucson area. I checked property records, medical facilities, assisted living centers, even church registries. The story is completely fabricated. I sat in my desk chair staring out at the Denver skyline while processing this information. My sister hadn't just stolen my money. She'd invented a dying grandmother to justify the theft. She'd manipulated our parents into protecting her by creating an elderly victim who needed care. How do we prove this to the court? I asked. Family tree documentation going back 3 generations, Marcus said. Death certificates for known relatives, immigration records. We're basically going to demonstrate that this aunt could not possibly exist unless your sister's family has secret relatives that no one else knows about. The investigator had been thorough. Birth records, death certificates, marriage licenses, immigration documents, a complete genealogical analysis proving that my sister's elderly aunt was as real as unicorns. But the evidence that really got to me came in month 5, when Marcus subpoenaed my parents' phone records and cross-referenced them with the timeline of events. Your sister called your parents 17 times during the 2 weeks before she sold the house, Marcus reported. 17 calls and then radio silence for 6 weeks after the sale closed. 17 calls. While she'd been blocking my number and avoiding my emails, she'd been calling our parents almost daily, probably coaching them on what to say if I asked questions, probably spinning her story about payment arrangements and financial hardship and elderly aunts who needed constant care. What do they talk about for all those calls? I asked. Marcus flipped through the phone records. Average call duration was 43 minutes. That's not checking in conversation. That's detailed briefing conversation. Detailed briefing. My sister had spent 17 hours in 2 weeks programming our parents to be her accomplices, while spending 0 minutes returning my calls about the money she owed me. The breaking point for my parents came in month 6, when Marcus finally showed them the complete documentation of their daughter's deception. I wasn't there for that meeting. Marcus had arranged it as part of the discovery process, since my parents had been cited as potential witnesses who might have relevant information about Stephanie's financial claims. Mom called me that evening, and for the first time in months, she sounded genuinely shaken instead of defensively angry. "Oliver, we saw the paperwork today," she said without preamble. "All of it. The timeline, the property searches, the business planning, everything." I waited. After 6 months of being lectured about family loyalty and aggressive behavior and tearing the family apart over money, I wanted to hear exactly what she had to say. "She lied to us," Mom continued, her voice small and tired. "About everything, the aunt, the payment arrangements, even about why she moved. We thought she was struggling and needed our support, but she was planning this the entire time." "Yeah, Mom, she was. The investigator showed us the family records. There is no aunt in Arizona. There never was. She made it up to get us to—" Mom's voice trailed off as she realized what she was about to admit. "To get you to help her hide from me," I finished. The silence stretched long enough that I thought she might have hung up. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. "We're both sorry. We should have listened to you. We should have asked more questions. You should have given me her contact information when I asked for it 6 months ago," I said. "But you chose to protect her instead. We thought we were protecting the family." "No, you were protecting a thief. There's a difference." Dad got on the line then, his voice heavier than I'd heard it in years. "Son, your mother's right. We made a mistake, a big one. We let Stephanie manipulate us into becoming part of her scheme. Part of her scheme. Finally, someone else in the family was willing to call it what it was. The worst part," Dad continued, "is that I had doubts. From the beginning. Something didn't feel right about her story, about the timing, about the way she was avoiding you. But your mother thought I was being too suspicious, and You didn't trust your instincts," I said. "I let my love for her override my common sense. And I let her convince us that you were being unreasonable when you were the only one seeing the situation clearly. Too little, too late, but at least it was something." The deposition started in month 8, and that's when the legal process shifted from evidence gathering to evidence confrontation. Stephanie couldn't hide behind blocked phone numbers and interstate moves anymore. She had to sit in a room with lawyers and answer direct questions under oath about her actions. Marcus let me read the transcripts, and honestly, they were better than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. Attorney: "Ms. Gonzalez, did you sell your Phoenix residence in June 2023? Stephanie: "Yes." Attorney: "What was the net proceeds from that sale?" Stephanie: "I don't remember the exact amount." Attorney: "Let me refresh your memory with this settlement statement. The net proceeds were $162,000. Does that sound correct?" Stephanie: "If that's what the document says." Attorney: "What did you do with those proceeds?" Stephanie: "We used them to purchase our current home and to invest in my husband's business." Attorney: "Did you use any portion of those proceeds to repay the $45,000 loan from your brother Oliver?" Stephanie: "No." Attorney: "Why not?" Stephanie: "We needed the money for our new start in Arizona. Our new start. Like my retirement savings were just part of her startup capital." Attorney: "Ms. Gonzalez, did you block your brother's phone number and email address?" Stephanie: "Yes." Attorney: "When did you block his communications?" Stephanie: "Around the time we moved to Arizona." Attorney: "Why did you block his communications?" Stephanie: "I needed space to figure out how to handle the financial situation." Attorney: "Did you ask your parents not to give your brother your new contact information?" Stephanie: "I asked them to let me reach out to him when I was ready." Attorney: "Have you reached out to him at any point in the 14 months since you moved to Arizona?" Stephanie: "No." Attorney: "Ms. Gonzalez, you testified that you told your parents you were caring for an elderly aunt in Arizona. Is that correct?" Stephanie: "I said we were helping family in the area." Attorney: "Specifically, you told them about an elderly aunt who required daily care, correct?" Stephanie: "I may have mentioned family members who needed support." Attorney: "Ms. Gonzalez, do you have any relatives living in Arizona?" Long pause. Stephanie: "No." Attorney: So the elderly aunt requiring care does not exist? Stephanie, I was speaking generally about helping family in the future. Speaking generally about helping family in the future. Even under oath, my sister couldn't admit she'd flat out lied. She was still trying to word lawyer her way out of consequences. But the most damaging testimony came when her own lawyer tried to mount a defense based on financial hardship. Stephanie's attorney, Your Honor, my client is experiencing genuine financial difficulties and requests the court consider a payment plan rather than a lump sum judgment. Judge, Counselor, your client just testified that she received $162,000 from a house sale and used those proceeds to help purchase a $200,000 property and fund a business startup. How exactly does that demonstrate financial hardship? Stephanie's attorney, the business investment was as necessary for long-term financial stability, Your Honor. Judge, using money that belonged to someone else? Stephanie's attorney, the loan was between family members, Your Honor. These situations are often complicated by emotion and miscommunication. Judge, reviewing documents. Counselor, I'm looking at a signed loan agreement with specific repayment terms, documented bank transfers, and evidence that your client blocked all communication with the lender while using the loan proceeds to purchase assets. This isn't a miscommunication. This is breach of contract with fraudulent intent. Fraudulent intent. Those were the magic words that turned my sister's scheme from a family dispute into an actual legal finding of fraud. The final ruling came 10 months after Marcus had first filed the lawsuit, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other day, until my phone rang with news that made the entire legal marathon worth every penny. We won, Marcus said without preamble. Complete victory. The judge ruled in our favor on all counts. I was sitting in my office halfway through reviewing quarterly reports for a client when the call came through. I set down my red pen and leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. What are the damages? $134,000 total. Original loan amount, 5 years of interest at the legal rate. All legal fees, court costs, and punitive damages for the fraudulent conduct. $134,000. Almost exactly what my missing $45,000 was going to cost me in lost retirement growth by the time I was 66. The judge was not happy with your sister's conduct, Marcus continued. He specifically cited the deliberate fraud, the breach of written agreement, and the bad faith actions including blocked communications and interstate asset movement. This was as clear a case of intentional theft as he'd seen in a family dispute. What happens now? She has 30 days to pay the judgment. If she doesn't pay voluntarily, we can pursue asset seizure. Asset seizure. The house that she'd bought with my retirement money could be taken to satisfy the debt she'd created by stealing my retirement money. What are the chances she pays voluntarily? Marcus laughed. Based on her pattern of behavior over the last 2 years, she'll probably spend the 30 days trying to find new ways to avoid responsibility, which means we'll be seizing assets. Good. Oliver, I have to ask, are you prepared for the family fallout from this? Asset seizure tends to make people desperate, and desperate people often blame everyone except themselves. I thought about my parents, who had finally seen the evidence and admitted they'd been manipulated. I thought about my sister, who had chosen profit over family and deception over honesty at every decision point for 2 years. Marcus, my family fell apart the day she decided to steal from me. Everything that happens now is just cleanup. When the 30 days passed without payment, the court issued its final order. Due to Stephanie's failure to satisfy the judgment voluntarily, her Arizona house would be sold to pay the debt she'd created through her deliberate fraud. The same house she'd bought with the profits from selling the house I'd helped save. The same house she'd been living in while telling our parents she was struggling financially. The same house that represented every penny of my retirement money that she'd stolen and invested for her own benefit. The court order was beautifully simple. Stephanie Gonzalez failed to pay the judgment within the required time frame, and the Arizona house was now subject to forced sale to satisfy her debt to Oliver Gonzalez in the amount of $134,000. Justice, it turned out, had an excellent sense of irony. The 30 days came and went like a bad joke with a predictable punchline. While I was checking my bank account every morning to see if maybe, just maybe, my sister had developed a conscience overnight, she was apparently busy doing what she'd always done best, finding new ways to avoid responsibility. Marcus called me on day 31 with news that surprised exactly no one who'd been paying attention for the last 2 years. She didn't pay, he said, and I could hear him shuffling papers in the background. Not a penny, which means we're moving to asset seizure. Asset seizure. 2 words that shouldn't have made me feel as satisfied as they did, but honestly, After watching my sister live in a house bought with my retirement money while crying poverty to our parents, I was way past caring about family harmony. What's the timeline? Arizona moves fast on these things. The court's already issued the seizure order, and the house will be put up for forced sale within 60 days. She can try to refinance or sell it privately to pay the judgment, but good luck getting a loan when there's a court order hanging over the property. The beautiful thing about legal consequences is that they don't care about your sob story or your family connections, or how many tears you can produce on command. Money talks, bullshit walks, and my sister had finally run out of people willing to listen to her performance, but apparently she hadn't figured that out yet. 3 days after the seizure order was issued, Marcus called with an update that was equal parts frustrating and hilarious. Your sister's lawyer filed a motion asking the court to reconsider the asset seizure, he said. She's arguing that taking the house is excessive punishment, and that your sister needs time to arrange alternative financing. Alternative financing? Like someone was going to loan money to a person with a court judgment for fraud hanging over her head. What's the judge's response? Let me read you the exact quote. Marcus said, and I could hear pages flipping. The defendant had multiple opportunities, over a period of 5 years, to honor her written agreement and repay the plaintiff voluntarily. Instead, she chose to block all communication with the plaintiff while using the disputed funds to purchase assets and relocate to another state. The defendant's current financial position is a direct result of her deliberate choices to prioritize personal benefit over contractual obligations. I leaned back in my office chair, staring out at the Denver skyline while processing the judge's words. Multiple opportunities, deliberate choices, personal benefit over contractual obligations. He basically called her a lying thief, I said. In the most professional language possible, yes. The motion was denied. The house goes to auction in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. After 2 years of watching my sister live high on my dime while playing victim, justice finally had a deadline. But the real turning point came 4 days later, when my phone rang at 8 in the evening and Mom's number showed up on the screen. I almost didn't answer. I was getting pretty tired of being lectured about family loyalty by people who'd helped orchestrate the theft of my retirement savings. But something made me pick up, and I'm glad I did because this time was different. Oliver? Mom's voice was shaky like she'd been crying. We need to talk to you, about Stephanie, about everything. Mom, if this is another lecture about how I'm tearing the family apart. No. The word came out sharp, decisive. This is an apology. That stopped me cold. In 52 years of being her son, I couldn't remember my mother ever starting a conversation with an apology, especially not about Stephanie. Your lawyer called today, she continued, her voice getting steadier. He wanted to speak with us as potential witnesses, and he showed us everything, Oliver, all of it. What do you mean, all of it? The timeline, the property searches, the business planning, the fake aunt story. Her voice broke on the last part. The phone records showing she called us 17 times in 2 weeks to coach us on what to say to you. I felt something shift in my chest, like a weight I'd been carrying for months suddenly loosening. She used us, Mom continued. And now she was definitely crying. She manipulated us into helping her steal from you, and we were too blind to see it. We thought we were protecting our daughter, but we were actually helping her commit fraud against our son. The silence stretched between us while I tried to figure out what to say. Part of me wanted to point out that I'd been trying to tell them this for months. Part of me wanted to ask why it took a lawyer showing them evidence for them to believe what their own son had been saying all along. But mostly I just felt tired. Where's Dad? I asked. He's right here. He wants to talk to you too. The phone shuffled, and then Dad's voice came on the line, heavier than I'd heard it in years. Son, I owe you an apology. A big one. He cleared his throat, that nervous habit he'd had since I was a kid. I should have trusted you from the beginning. Should have asked harder questions about Stephanie's story. Should have seen that her behavior didn't match her claims. Dad, no, let me finish. I've been thinking about this for 3 days straight, going over every conversation, every excuse I made for her. And the truth is, I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. But I convinced myself I was being paranoid because your mother thought I was being too suspicious. In the background, I could hear Mom say something that sounded like, "Don't blame me for this." I'm not blaming anyone but myself, Dad said firmly. I'm 76 years old, Oliver. I've seen enough liars in my life to recognize one. And I let my love for my daughter override my common sense. The weight in my chest shifted again, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. She played all of us, I said. No, Dad said. She played your mother and me. You saw through her from the beginning, and instead of listening to you, we made you feel like the bad guy for telling the truth. Mom came back on the line then, her voice steadier now but still shaky around the edges. Oliver, there's something else you need to know. About Stephanie and Jesse. What about them? She called us yesterday, hysterical about the house seizure. But according to her, Jesse is blaming her for everything. Says she destroyed their financial stability and ruined his business by getting them involved in a lawsuit. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Jesse, who'd knowingly benefited from my stolen money to fund his consulting venture, was now throwing my sister under the bus because the consequences had finally caught up with him. His business is failing, Mom continued. Has been for months, apparently. The legal mess scared off his clients, and now they can't make their house payment or their business loan payments. They're drowning, Oliver. Could, I thought, but I didn't say it out loud. Because even though my sister had stolen from me and my brother-in-law had helped her do it, I wasn't quite ready to celebrate their complete financial destruction. Yet, they're going to lose everything, Mom said quietly. The house, the business, probably their marriage. She's talking about having to move into an apartment with their son, starting over with nothing. They're starting over with my money, I pointed out. They've been living on my retirement savings for 2 years while telling everyone they were struggling. You're right, Dad said, taking the phone back. And that's exactly what I told her when she called looking for sympathy. I said, Stephanie, you made this mess by lying and stealing. Don't call here expecting us to feel sorry for you. That stopped me cold. My father, who'd spent my entire life avoiding family conflict and deferring to Mom on emotional issues, had actually confronted my sister directly. What did she say? She hung up on me. Dad's voice had a note of satisfaction in it, but not before accusing me of choosing sides and destroying the family. And what did you tell her? I told her she destroyed the family the day she decided to steal from her brother. Everything that's happening now is just cleanup. Jesus. My conflict-avoidant father had developed a spine at 76. Maybe there really was justice in the world. The court auction was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October, in a conference room at the Pima County Courthouse that smelled like coffee and failure. I flew to Arizona 2 days early, partly to scope out the property beforehand, and partly because I wanted to be absolutely sure I understood what I was bidding on. The house was in a neighborhood called Desert Meadows, one of those planned retirement communities with golf courses and swimming pools and HOA rules that probably regulated the exact shade of beige you could paint your garage door. It was nice. Really nice. Nicer than anything I could have afforded to buy outright, which made sense since my sister had bought it with profits from a house that my money had saved. I drove through the neighborhood slowly, checking out the comparable properties, the amenities, the general vibe. This wasn't some desperate cash grab purchase in a declining area. This was a strategic investment in an appreciating market, bought by someone who'd done her research and picked a winner. With my retirement money. The property itself was exactly what the listing photos had shown. A single-story ranch with a 3-car garage, a swimming pool, and a view of the mountains that probably added $20,000 to the value. The landscaping was perfect. The exterior was immaculate, and the HOA fees were reasonable for what you got. My sister had picked well. Too bad she'd picked with stolen money. The auction itself was surprisingly anticlimactic. I'd expected drama, confrontation, maybe my sister showing up to make a scene. Instead, it was just me, 3 other bidders who looked like professional real estate investors, and a court official who ran the proceedings like she was selling office supplies. Opening bid is $80,000, the official announced. Do I hear 80? One of the investors raised his hand, then another, then me. The bidding moved fast and efficient, jumping in $5,000 increments until we hit $120,000. That's when 2 of the investors dropped out, leaving just me and a guy in an expensive suit who looked like he flipped houses for a living. 125, he said. 130, I countered. 135. 140. He studied me for a moment, probably trying to figure out if I was a serious buyer or just running up the price. I met his gaze and kept my expression neutral, like I had all day and twice the budget. He shook his head and stepped back. Sold to bidder number 4 for $140,000, the official announced. Just like that, I owned my sister's house. The house she'd bought with the profits from selling the house I'd saved. The house she'd been living in while blocking my calls and telling our parents she was too financially stressed to deal with repayment. The paperwork took another hour. Cashier's check, title transfer, deed recording. All very official and legal and permanent. By noon, I was walking out of the courthouse with the keys to a $200,000 property that I'd just bought for $140,000. But the real satisfaction came 30 minutes later, when Marcus called with the final accounting. The court has applied $134,000 from your purchase price to satisfy the judgment, he said. After legal fees and court costs, your sister will receive approximately $6,000 from the sale of her home. $6,000. From a house worth $250,000. From a property she'd bought with the profits of selling the house that my money had saved from foreclosure. So she went from living in a $250,000 house to getting a $6,000 check, I said. Exactly. And since they've been living off credit cards and failing business loans while fighting this lawsuit, that $6,000 probably won't even cover their moving expenses. Marcus was right. Within a week, I'd learned through my parents that Stephanie and Jesse had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment across town. Jesse's consulting business had officially failed, killed by the chaos and negative publicity from the lawsuit. They were starting over with nothing but debt and the kind of reputation that makes landlords ask for extra security deposits. Meanwhile, I was officially the owner of a beautiful house in a desirable retirement community, purchased for 30% below market value thanks to the forced sale circumstances. Sometimes justice doesn't just win. Sometimes it wins with style. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in another rental car outside another house, except this time I owned the place I was staring at. And let me tell you, the irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. The house looked even better in person than it had in the auction photos. Single-story ranch style with a 3-car garage, mature desert landscaping that probably cost more than my first car, and a swimming pool that sparkled in the Arizona sun like something out of a vacation brochure. The whole neighborhood screamed, successful retirement community. Golf course views, HOA-maintained common areas, the kind of place where people who'd made smart financial decisions came to enjoy their golden years. My sister had picked well. Too bad she'd picked with my money. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a minute, processing the magnitude of what had happened. This house was worth at least $250,000, probably more in the current market. Stephanie had bought it for exactly $200,000, using the profits from selling the Phoenix house that I'd saved from foreclosure. She'd been living here for over a year, swimming in that pool, enjoying those mountain views, hosting family barbecues that I wasn't invited to because I was being aggressive about wanting my money back. The neighbor across the street was watering his perfect desert garden and gave me a friendly wave. I waved back, wondering if he knew that the previous owners had been forced to sell because of fraud. Probably not. In neighborhoods like this, people minded their own business and assumed everyone had earned their way in legitimately. Unlike my sister, who'd bought her way in with stolen retirement funds. I used the keys that had come with the court paperwork and walked through the house slowly, room by room. Everything was immaculate. Hardwood floors that gleamed, granite countertops that looked like they'd been professionally cleaned yesterday, updated appliances that still had warranty stickers on them. The master bedroom had a walk-in closet bigger than my Denver apartment's living room, and the backyard pool area was set up like something from a home and garden magazine. This wasn't the house of someone struggling financially. This was the house of someone who'd made a substantial profit and decided to live large with someone else's money. But what really got to me was the home office. Stephanie had set up a whole workspace with an expensive desk, ergonomic chair, and a computer system that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. On the desk, half hidden under some papers, was a folder labeled Arizona Investment Properties. I opened it, because honestly, at this point, my sister had forfeited any right to privacy. Inside were printouts of real estate listings, market analysis reports, and investment calculations going back 2 years. 2 years. She'd been researching Arizona real estate investments since 6 months after I'd saved her Phoenix house from foreclosure. While I'd been thinking my money was gone forever, she'd been planning her next profitable move. The most recent documents in the folder were from 3 months ago. More property listings, more investment research. Apparently owning one house bought with stolen money wasn't enough. She'd been planning to expand her fraudulent real estate empire. Good thing the court had other ideas. I called Marcus from the kitchen, looking out at that picture-perfect pool while I gave him the update. The property is exactly what we thought, I told him. High-end retirement community, beautifully maintained, worth every penny of the court's valuation. Maybe more. Any signs of your sister or her family? Gone. Completely gone. But Marcus, you need to see this place. This isn't someone who was struggling financially. This is someone who was living high on my dime while playing victim to our parents. Have you looked into where they moved to? Actually, yeah. I'd driven past their new address on the way to the house because I'm nothing if not thorough. Small apartment complex across town. 2-bedroom rental in a neighborhood that's definitely a step down from this place. The parking lot was half empty and the pool looked like it hadn't been cleaned in months. Sounds like reality finally caught up with them. It really had. According to my parents, who'd gotten some of this information secondhand through family gossip networks, Jesse's consulting business had completely collapsed. Turns out that having your business associated with a fraud lawsuit makes potential clients nervous about working with you. Who could have predicted that? Any word on their financial situation? Marcus asked. From what I hear through the family grapevine, they're drowning. Credit cards maxed out, behind on the apartment rent, Jesse's looking for regular employment for the first time in years. Apparently my sister is working part-time at a retail store while they try to figure out how to rebuild from nothing. Which is exactly where they would have been if they'd never stolen your money in the first place. Exactly. Except they'd gotten to live in luxury for a year and a half before the consequences caught up with them. But at least the consequences had finally arrived. I spent another hour walking through the house, taking photos and making notes. This was mine now, bought and paid for, with justice and legal consequences. The question was what to do with it. The practical part of me started running numbers. I could keep it as a rental property, maybe hire a management company to handle the tenants and maintenance. Arizona's retirement community market was strong and the rental income would be solid. Or I could sell it and take the profits, which would more than compensate for the financial stress and uncertainty my sister had caused. By the time I locked up and headed back to my hotel, I'd made my decision. I was going to sell it. Not because I needed the money, but because I wanted my sister to know that her fraudulent investment had ultimately benefited the person she'd tried to screw over. Every penny of profit from this house was going straight into my retirement account, where it should have been growing for the last 2 years if she'd just honored our agreement. 3 days later, my parents flew to Arizona. They'd asked to see the house, and honestly, I thought it was time they understood exactly what their daughter had done with my retirement savings. Dad was quiet during the drive from the airport to the house, staring out the window at the desert landscape like he was seeing it for the first time. Mom kept making small talk about the weather and the flight, but her voice had that nervous quality that meant she was preparing herself for something unpleasant. When we pulled into the driveway of the house, both of them went completely silent. "This is it," I said, turning off the rental car engine. "This is where your daughter has been living for the last year and a half while telling you she was too financially stressed to return my calls." Dad got out of the car slowly, his 76-year-old joints protesting the movement, but his eyes were sharp as he took in the 3-car garage, the professional landscaping, the mountain views that added $20,000 to the property value. "Jesus," he said quietly. "This place must have cost $200,000, I said. "Bought with the profits from selling the house I saved from foreclosure." Mom was still sitting in the passenger seat, staring at the house through the windshield like she was having trouble processing what she was seeing. "Oliver," she said finally, her voice small and uncertain, "this is really where Stephanie was living? Come on, let me show you the inside." The tour was brutal in the best possible way. Every room, every upgrade, every luxury feature was evidence of how my sister had been living while claiming financial hardship. The granite countertops that cost more than most people's cars. The master bathroom with the jetted tub and separate shower. The pool area with the built-in barbecue and covered patio. But the moment that really got to Mom was when we walked into the home office and she saw that folder of investment property research. "What's this?" she asked, picking up the papers with shaking hands. "Stephanie's been researching real estate investments for 2 years. Wait, I said. While telling you she was struggling to make ends meet, she was planning her next profitable property purchase." Mom sank into the expensive office chair, clutching the papers like they were evidence of a crime, which technically they were. "She lied to us," Mom whispered, and for the first time in months, she looked genuinely broken instead of defensively angry. About everything. The financial stress, the struggling business, the need for us to protect her from your aggressive demands for repayment. Dad had wandered over to the window that looked out on the pool area, his hands clasped behind his back in that pose he used when he was thinking hard about something. "How much is this place worth?" he asked without turning around. "Conservative estimate? $250. Maybe more in the current market." He turned around then, his face grave. "So she used your $45,000 to buy time, sold the Phoenix house for massive profits, and used those profits to buy a $250,000 house in a retirement community. While blocking my communications and telling you I was being unreasonable about wanting my money back," I added. Mom started crying then. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen from Stephanie over the years, but genuine grief and shock. The kind of crying that happens when you realize you've been played for a fool by someone you trusted. "We helped her," she said through the tears. "When you called asking for her contact information, when you tried to tell us something was wrong, we protected her instead of listening to you. We made you feel like the bad guy for wanting your own money back." Dad came over and put his hand on her shoulder, but his eyes stayed on me. "Son, we owe you an apology. A big one." We let her manipulate us into becoming part of her scheme. Yeah, you did. The silence stretched between us while Mom cried quietly and Dad struggled with how to fix something that had been broken for almost 2 years. What happens now? Dad asked finally. Now I sell the house, I said, and I use the proceeds to not only get my money back, but to boost my retirement savings beyond what they would have been if Stephanie had just honored our agreement in the first place. I'd already talked to a real estate agent who specialized in the area. Desert Meadows was a desirable community with limited inventory, and houses like this one sold quickly. She estimated we could list it for $240,000 and probably get multiple offers within a week. $240,000 minus the $140,000 I'd paid at auction would net me $100,000. Add that to the $45,000 of my original loan that was covered by the judgment, and I'd recover not just my stolen money, but an additional $55,000 on top of it. My sister's fraud was going to make me more money than if she'd simply paid me back on time like she'd promised. The listing went live on a Tuesday. By Friday, we had 3 offers, all above asking price. The winning bid was $210,000, which after real estate commissions and closing costs would net me about $195,000. $195,000 minus my purchase price of $140,000 meant a profit of $55,000, plus the $45,000 of my original loan that the judgment had covered, plus the additional interest and penalties that had been part of the court award. Total recovery, approximately $200,000. My sister's elaborate theft scheme was going to make me richer than I'd been before she stole from me. The closing was scheduled for the following month, which gave me time to fly back to Denver and prepare for what I knew was coming next. Because if there's one thing I'd learned about my sister over the last 2 years, it's that she never accepted consequences gracefully. The call came on a Wednesday evening, 3 days before the scheduled closing. Dad's number on my phone, which immediately made me suspicious because Dad never called about emotional family issues. Oliver, it's your father. Hey, Dad, what's up? There was a pause, and I could hear Mom talking in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. I'm calling about Stephanie, he said, and his voice had that careful quality that meant he was reading from a script. She wanted me to ask if you'd consider sharing some of the proceeds from the house sale with her. I nearly dropped the phone. I'm sorry, what? She says she put a lot of work into improving the property while she lived there, and she thinks it's fair that she should get some benefit from the sale since her improvements increase the value. The fucking audacity of this woman. She'd stolen my retirement money, used it to buy a house, lived in luxury for 18 months while blocking my communications, and now she wanted me to share the profits from selling the house that I'd been forced to seize to recover my stolen money. Dad, are you serious right now? Another pause. She's really struggling, Oliver. They lost the consulting business, they're behind on rent, Jessie can't find work because of the lawsuit publicity. She's working retail for minimum wage and trying to support a teenager. Good. Maybe now she understands what financial stress actually feels like. Oliver, please, she's learned her lesson. She knows she made mistakes. Can't you find it in your heart to help family? Help family. Like I hadn't helped family when I'd loaned her $45,000 to save her house. Like I hadn't been helping family for years by sending money to cover Dad's medical bills. Like she'd been helping family when she'd stolen my retirement savings and disappeared. Dad, I'm going to explain this once, and then I never want to have this conversation again, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Stephanie stole $45,000 from me. She used that money to orchestrate an elaborate profit scheme. She blocked my communications for 2 years while living in a house bought with my stolen money. The only reason I'm getting any money back is because the court forced her to pay. But Oliver, I'm not finished. The house sale is going to net me about $200,000. After subtracting my purchase price and legal fees, I'll make a profit of approximately $60,000. That profit doesn't begin to compensate me for 2 years of financial uncertainty, stress, and family destruction. Stephanie is lucky I'm not pursuing additional damages for the emotional distress and lost opportunity costs of her fraud. The silence on the other end was so complete, I thought he might have hung up. She's not getting a penny from this sale, I continued. And if you or Mom call me again asking me to share stolen money with the person who stole it, I'll hang up and we won't talk for a year. Oliver, she's your sister. She stopped being my sister when she decided to commit fraud against me. Now she's just someone who owes me money and has been forced by a court to pay it back. I could hear Mom crying in the background and Dad making shushing noises. Don't call me about this again, I said, and hung up. The closing happened exactly as scheduled. I signed papers transferring ownership to a nice retired couple from Minnesota, who were thrilled to find such a beautiful property in their budget range. The proceeds check was deposited into an escrow account pending the final settlement calculations. 3 days later, I got a cashier's check for $197,000. After subtracting my auction purchase price of $140,000, I had a net profit of $57,000. Add that to the original $45,000 that the judgment had recovered, plus the interest and penalties, and my total recovery was approximately $210,000. My sister's theft had ultimately made me $65,000 richer than I'd been before she stole from me. Justice wasn't just sweet, it was profitable. But the real victory came 2 weeks later, when Mom called to tell me that she and Dad had seen Stephanie and Jesse's new living situation. Oliver, they're in a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex that... Mom's voice trailed off like she was struggling to find diplomatic words. It's not nice. The parking lot has potholes, half the exterior lights are burned out, and there's a sign by the pool saying it's closed for repairs. Sounds like they're living within their means for the first time in years. Jesse's working at a hardware store, part-time. Stephanie's still at that retail job, but they're talking about her picking up a second job to make ends meet. Good. Let them learn what financial stress actually felt like when you couldn't steal someone else's retirement money to solve your problems. Your nephew is having a hard time, Mom continued. He's embarrassed about the apartment, embarrassed about the lawsuit, embarrassed that his friends from the old neighborhood know his parents had to sell their house because of fraud. Maybe that's a good lesson for him about the consequences of dishonest behavior. Oliver, please, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but this is still family. No, Mom, this is consequences. Stephanie made her choices. She chose to steal from me. She chose to lie to you. She chose to block my communications. She chose to fight the lawsuit instead of settling. Every single thing that's happening to her now is the direct result of her own decisions. The conversation ended with Mom saying she hoped I'd eventually find forgiveness, and me saying I hoped Stephanie would eventually take responsibility for her actions instead of expecting other people to fix the problem she'd created. But the conversation that really mattered happened 3 days later when Dad called back. Son, I want you to know that your mother and I have been talking about everything that's happened, about the role we played in enabling Stephanie's behavior, about the way we treated you during this whole mess. I waited because Dad wasn't usually the type to initiate difficult conversations. We were wrong, he said simply. We should have listened to you from the beginning. We should have asked harder questions about Stephanie's story. We should have given you her contact information when you asked for it. Instead, we let her manipulate us into protecting her from the consequences of her own actions. Yeah, you did. And we want you to know that it won't happen again. If Stephanie tries to use us to get to you, or if she tries to manipulate us into taking her side against you, we'll shut it down immediately. That was more than I'd expected from my conflict-avoidant father. What about family gatherings, I asked. Holidays, birthdays, that kind of thing. What about them? I'm not going to pretend nothing happened. I'm not going to sit at a dinner table with someone who stole my retirement money and acted like I was the villain for wanting it back. If Stephanie's going to be at family events, I won't be there. Dad was quiet for a long moment. Oliver, that's going to make holidays pretty complicated. Then Stephanie can take responsibility for her actions and make amends. Until she does, she doesn't get to pretend we're all one big happy family. What would taking responsibility look like? I'd been thinking about this for weeks. A genuine apology. Not to you and Mom, to me. An acknowledgement that she stole my money and lied about it. An explanation of why she thought that was acceptable behavior. And a commitment to rebuild trust through actions, not words. And if she does that, then maybe we can start rebuilding a relationship. But until she does, I'm done pretending that what she did was just a family misunderstanding. Dad agreed that my conditions were reasonable, which was progress. Mom would probably take longer to accept that protecting Stephanie from consequences hadn't actually helped anyone. But at least Dad was willing to stop enabling her victim routine. The final piece of this whole mess came exactly 4 weeks after the house sale closed, when I walked into my Denver bank with the settlement check and asked to deposit it into my retirement account. The banker who handled the transaction was professional and efficient, but I could see her doing mental math as she looked at the deposit amount. This is quite a substantial addition to your retirement portfolio, she said, updating my account balance on her computer screen. Your total retirement savings are now significantly higher than they were at this time last year. Significantly higher? My sister's elaborate theft scheme had ultimately boosted my retirement savings beyond what they would have been if she'd simply honored our original agreement and paid me back on time. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot afterward, checking my account balance on my phone and doing some calculations of my own. The $210,000 recovery, invested properly over the next 14 years, until I turned 66, would grow to approximately $600,000. $600,000 that I wouldn't have had if my sister had just been honest. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the deposit confirmation. Congratulations on your retirement upgrade. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. He was right. Sometimes justice doesn't just win. Sometimes it wins so decisively that you end up better off than you were before the crime was committed. I drove home thinking about my sister, probably sitting in her 2-bedroom apartment across town, working retail for minimum wage and wondering how her brilliant scheme had ended up making her victim richer while leaving her with nothing. The money in my retirement account would compound for the next 14 years, growing larger every month while she struggled to rebuild from the financial ruin her own choices had created. And honestly, that felt like exactly the right ending to this story.